Hello, everyone. I'm Liz Farrell. I'm the director of our Artist in Residence program at Anderson Ranch Arts Center. Welcome, everyone, to our Meet the Residents night here at Anderson Ranch. We're so excited to have you all. You all arrived yesterday, and we'll be here for 10 weeks to make work in our studios, interact with visiting artists and critics, and we're just so glad to have you here. So thank you for being here. We are going to get started tonight. We're going to meet all 16 artists in residence. Each artist in residence will have 3 minutes to speak, and we will go ahead and get started.
Hi, I missed the first part, so I just gonna go quickly just to my slideshow and giving the little bit information. I usually working on with the founding material versus industrial, the nature material, which one I'm coming from, like a rice land in Korea, my older hay around it. So I'm kind of trying to juxtapose with between that hay nature versus the zip tie, PVC pipe, and all the finding materials. And this one is also the first one I display in the Canon Arts Center in the Washington D.C. For MFA thesis show, and also this one in the Canon Arts Center in the Rotunda. This one is standing in the first floor and second floor in the extended with the 550 code weight, so basically lifting. And this one is I stay unknown world. So same thing is that nature material versus industrial material. Which one is we dealing with a lot of like a non-decayable material, like everywhere, and the concerning in the pollution, pollute this earth and things like that. So my idea with it's basic is the social healing, and when the pandemic, I made like auspicious energy circle, which one is the first one, is things like that. So I don't know if the YouTube video is working. And this is a recent work, which one is going to be directly related to the work in this Anderson Ranch. I made the top part is like crochet, and I stuffing with filler, the poly filler, and I do the zip tie weaving and underneath. Some of them is a plastic sewing with water bottle, sewing with the like a polyester ropes. And some of them is like crochet or founding material. So this time I'm going to do the ceramic in the bottom of a part, and the top part, which one I'm using here, crochet material, bonding to it, to the, that kind of shape. So basically organism, unknown world is where we could be in our inner maybe world, could be somewhere, or we can imagine. So my goal is to make this kind of things to grow in the big space. So installation, maybe complete one of installation in this range. Thank you. Oh, I should have passed. I don't know this. I'm gonna just.
I'm Dan, Daniel Claussen, either or. I use he, him, or they, them pronouns. So I'm originally from Seattle, and I'm going to be showing you some of my recent artworks and speaking about my practice in general. So my main focus materially is with ceramics. So through this medium, I craft forms that are reflective of the abject body, the traumatized body, and the queer body. These forms are familiar to the body, yet amorphous in defining anatomy. I use amorphousness as an action to let go of the academically rendered, colonially enforced, and socially and politically elected ideals of the body, so that I can therefore engage in a visual conversation that accepts bodily connections beyond these constraints. I use my work to speak upon the complexities of queerness and my own transformation into such, and promote empathy, connection, and validation within and outside of these identities. With my time here at the ranch, I'm going to utilize a multifaceted approach to my mostly ceramic background. I'm going to be combining a lot of these ceramic forms with sculptural aspects of cement and wax, as well as experimenting with photography and video as a way to immortalize the components of wet clay, to contemplate the ephemeral, the mortal, as well as the timeless qualities of body and gender in our society. I'll be connecting all of these components through research and writing that will dive deeper into the conceptual and political state that is queerness in America today. With this, I hope to bring awareness to the social political violences that queer and transgender people are facing historically and currently, and bring about a space that is sensitive and healing.
Hello. Okay. So, thank you all for having me here. It's been a pleasure spending time and getting to know you all. Yeah, what shall I say about this work? So, I grew up in London to an immigrant family, and there were 4 of us that lived in a 1-bedroom apartment. My mother, my grandmother, and my aunt. And I guess from an early age, this idea of physical space was kind of important to me, where I could sort of find that. But also growing up, being born in London, but not being English, and then going to Cyprus to see my grandparents or see relatives in the summers, we would get mocked for, there was like a term that would be used, Charlie, so we weren't actually Cypriot, we were sort of like this byproduct of. So I never really felt like I fitted in either of these spaces. And so the work that I'm showing you here, I guess, comes from this idea of trying to create not only a physical space, but a cultural space from which to express myself. And so I started looking at sculptors that really interested me, people like Rachel Whiteread and Jessica Stockholder, who would make very large freestanding objects that would be very present and make statements about space. And so as a young artist who felt that they didn't really have a voice within the big city of London, I wanted to find a way of making these sculptures. And so I came about building these miniature models for which to place these everyday objects inside. And so a lot of these spaces depict, they're autobiographical. They are spaces that I grew up in. So this being the living room in the apartment that we grew up in. My mother's kitchen. I guess some of the work is quite humorous, but also, the eggs we would expect to find in a kitchen, but somehow when they're represented in this way, they throw us off, and we start to maybe question our own sense of space or place in the world. This is a space that I created in when I was in New York. I moved to New York, and this is a reconstruction of my studio space in Long Island City. Often the objects that I collect are from communities that I live in and adore and am influenced by. So in this instance, the hairbands that I created to resemble some kind of weird sculpture. This is something more recent. Since 2017, I haven't really had a fixed studio, and I've just been moving from place to place, so it's been quite difficult to actually make the miniatures. And so I devised this way of working where I would find objects that I felt had some kind of energy or significance to not only myself in the space, but to other people within that space. And so, for instance, this was the dining table that we would all eat on. And in a similar way, taking a familiar object out of its context and representing it in another way. And that being a metaphor for perhaps where we find ourselves culturally in the world. The last slide that I'm going to show you, I also have started making these collages as a more spontaneous way of working. Again, choosing one space to then juxtapose another space or another image within and create some kind of dichotomy or conversation between those two disparate elements. Thank you.
Doing a key check. I don't see any. Hi. Thank you, everybody, for your talk so far. I'm Andrea. I'm from Winnipeg, Canada. I work in sculpture, installation, and sound performance, doing like experimental electronics. And I often collaborate with a lot of people in my work. I think it comes out of my background in DIY punk, being a part of a community and like bringing that spirit into like a more physical sculptural realm and trying to bring worlds together is like a thing that I'm always trying to do. So I think my aim generally is to bring some kind of like performative vitality into the things that I do. And more recently, a lot of my work has been dealing with illness and trauma within capitalism, specifically coming from my own experience as having a chronic illness. And so this work is from a body of work called Sick Room. And it was all kind of like dealing with the architectures and amulets of healing. So everything from like medieval pilgrimage amulets to large-scale landscape architecture pieces, and the ones in front are sand cast in iron, so they're super heavy, and they all use words. So circling around the room, I use a lot of text in my work. Circling around the room, there's like small amulets that are mounted to the wall, and they all layer words on top of each other, and then through their serifs, they create a kind of like structural composition. So this one you can see, I'll flip it around, you'll see the other side, it says diagnosis stacked on top of each other. And this one here says cures and curse, which was kind of an ode to this critical disability theorist named Eli Clare, who has a book called Brilliant Imperfection, Grappling with the Cure. So this is diagnosis, and it's kind of like a room divider shape. And then, so in this space, oh, can I go back? Okay, oops, I went forward. I don't know if I can go back now. Oh. Oh, now we're going really far. You want to do it? Okay, thank you. Slideshows are fun. Yeah, can we go back to the first slide? Yeah, so in the back of the room is a kind of like bandstand-like structure. I just finished this work like in the spring, so it's kind of like I'm still kind of figuring out what I was doing with it. And inside it is a bunch of chimes with speakers attached, so it creates a drone. It resonates the chimes or the pipes, and so it's a constant drone that from far away is a bit soothing, but as you get close into it, it's like a bit unsettling. And I did a performance inside that. I collaborated with a Vancouver-based sound artist, Anju Singh, who does violin and noise, and I did electronics with it. So this is just like a 40-minute performance, so there's just clips of it. And I'll just let it play for a minute. We both come from religious backgrounds that valorize labor, so we were have like a lot of baggage maybe from that. So we were thinking a lot about labor and healing within this. She comes from Sikhism and my family's from Mormonism, so we did a lot of kind of ritual gesture stuff in this. In the interest of time, I'll just skip forward because it gets also very loud in 1 second, or maybe it's just going to play. I don't know if you guys can even hear that. Okay, so last one, this is a piece called Crisis Canon. It was on I do some site-specific stuff too. It was on the site of this concrete testing plant, and that was never built, where they built these piles into the ground that have been sinking for the last 50 years. And I did a performance in front of it with 2 opera singers and 2 electronic noise musicians, and they performed a graphic score that I made for the event. And I'll stop, because I've probably gone over, hey? Yeah.
Hello, I'm Amethyst. Wrong button. So I'm primarily a clay person, but I do work in mixed media, and I intentionally say clay because more of my work is actually unfired than fired. So this piece is actually fired, but my current body of work is actually based on my experiences of loss and feeling isolation and kind of depression. So I wasn't sure how to make that work, and then the pandemic hit, and I started seeing a lot of parallels, and so I started making work, and this is my piece. It's called The Distance Between, so it's kind of pulling off of my physical space I saw in between me and my husband before he committed suicide, and then the distance that you see between people, right, like in the beginning of the pandemic when people were afraid to be by each other. It's kind of And so while I'm here, I'm actually working on these pieces with the flowers. It's kind of about how in funerals people put these fronts up, and then they have these exposed sides that they kind of hide and talk about, like, who do you show what to, you know? And so you have the facades. Oh, you can't see it here, but maybe on the next slide. I can't remember. But so these ones didn't really show what I intended them to show. So I'm really going to be working on these as I'm here. Because right now, so on the right, you can see, like, that's the facade side that's hiding everything, and then the exposed. So each one had a front and a back. But I tend to use, like, certain flowers because they were important to family members of my own, which kind of obscured the idea that these are referencing funerals, because these aren't typical funeral flowers here in this country. So you'll see some different flowers happening. Here's just kind of a detail shot. I also like to push the boundaries of what is socially acceptable to do within a gallery space. So the piece in the back here is actually interactive, and so is the first one. So you actually walk through it, and it makes noise, and it shimmers. My husband was actually from Colorado, so I thought about the aspens and the different noises that they made, and this piece makes a similar noise, a little different, but yeah. So that's what I'm working on while I'm here. I think that's my last slide.
Hi, my name is Rex Season. I work mostly in painting and installation. So I'm going to show you the installation first. Can we play the first video? So this work is part of my solo show up right now at the Taipei Fine Arts Museum. So the video's at the very end. Okay. Sure. Okay, thank you. So it's a part of the installation. We'll go through it. This is another installation I make. It's a mechanical, kinetic mechanical installation, and you'll see the videos in the end. I also make large paintings of disasters. So this is about the size of the entire wall here, and it's just tornado-torn disaster scene. This is a series of painting that was inspired by the quarantines during COVID-19. So the empty pool kind of symbolizes the lack of human activities, and then like the lack of family activities, and but on the other hand, it's like the looking at the cave. So there's a sense of hope. So it was like during the quarantine, you get good news and bad news, and when it's like a little bit of good news, you feel like, oh, everything's going better. But then bad news drops, and then you're like, oh, you're going back. So you keep on wavering between hope and absolute despair. So I like to make very depressing paintings. Now I'm going to show you the videos. So the first video. I ordered a custom-made baggage claim from China, and so this is it's a very large installation, about the size of half of this room, and the inspiration comes from the empty airports during the lockdown, and how people are forced into like long distance relationships. So they are kind of this unclaimed baggage that never get touched. They just keep circling. Very depressing stuff. All right, can we play the next video? All right, this is the last thing I'm going to show. It's called a batting average of a dick. It's inspired by a real life event that happened to my friend who got attacked by aggressor right in front of his house. And we filed a report to the police, but in the end, the aggressor was let go. And it just shows how flawed the whole justice system is. And then, so I turned the sense of anger and like sense of absurdity into this robotic installation. So you just keep watching, just like the sense that you keep watching something terrible happen from a distance, and in the end, it becomes this like existential absurd thing that you had to accept it, and then from that, you kind of get a sense of humor out of it. But that sense of humor is very, very, very cruel. It's like the idea like we are civilized, but at the same time there's a certain amount of cruelty that keeps on happening. That's my presentation. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ray Londres. I'm a queer Cuban photographer and curator, working in the midst of high fashion, fine art, and also activism. I graduated 4 months ago from RISD, where I had this wonderful opportunity to have a video shown about my work, about my practice, and about one of the projects that I did there, which was called the Black Biennial. It's this exhibition that I made for Black artists all throughout Providence at the RISD Museum. And I'm really excited to show you what it looked like. Thank you.
Collaboration stands at the crux of everything I do, whether it's curatorial or photographic. I began my life in Cuba. It was the things that the women in my family taught me that left me the most impressed. Those pictures that I've taken of the women in my family have been the ones that I feel like impact me again and again and again. Whenever I try to take new images, I try to think, how can I bring the same sensitivity that I brought to my great-grandmother into these images? Trying to like ground people in their presence and in their power, and trying to show that photographically, and I think curatorially it does the same thing. It's basically trying to bring community into everything that I do. I think I'm someone that subverts without even trying. I just walk into a room and immediately I find critical things that I feel like should change. I started pulling away actually from the museum world because of its constrictiveness. In most of the times that I was working as like the only person of color. But I think the museum is apt for new beginnings. The Black Biennial is an idea that has been floating around through so many people's heads. I wanted to have this cemented as a tradition in our school to celebrate the work of Black artists every 2 years. I remember seeing Qualisha's exhibition here, Criteria of Beauty, and how incredible it was at bringing community together. And I felt like, yeah, this exact idea needs to be replicated and continued and supported by this institution. The Black Biennial has been my largest learning experience at RISD. Not only how to curate an exhibit, but how to handle administrative duties, how to execute an exhibition from top to bottom. It just felt like the most natural process. And I think that that's something that happens working in POC spaces. There's a difference between like working hard and like getting the work done and having a fun time doing it. For me, I've always thought that I needed to work hard in order for something to be good and to be stressed out about it. But that's not healthy nor sustainable. I'm so keen on seeing how things evolve even after the next 2 to 3 months. I can't say where I'll be. I can only say that I'll be living by my values.
Thank you.
Collaboration.
Hello, my name is Rachel Collier. I'm from Minneapolis, Minnesota. And I'm doing this backwards, I realize. This is my most recent work, and it's made with wool. Primarily, I'm a painter. I'm a mixed media painter. And I was making really action-oriented, really quick, emotional paintings, and I just found that I wasn't able to spend enough time in the practice, so I looked for other practices that took more time, and that brought me into fiber. And so I'm doing tufting. This is like a 10 feet wide installation from my last show. I'm really interested in non-representation, but also familiar places, seen and unseen biospheres that transcend scale and interior and exterior. So I feel like there's a lot of what's inside your body, what's in outer space. There's really high value of color to lift the spirit. I'm also interested in combining paintings with the fiber. This is like 10 feet wide. I'm saying the scale because it's so hard to see what the scale is for this stuff. This is a 8 feet wide, just pure tufted piece. I also am elongating the practice by dyeing the wool and the nylon that I use. But I also keep an anchor with just traditional painting, which is where I started. This is everything that I'm showing here was in the same show that just happened in April, except for this last thing. And what else? I think that's it. I'm going to be making more of these at Anderson Ranch. I brought all of my wool roving. The process is very much like painting in that you are blending with carding brushes and making like the full palette. And then you just take a single needle and get the wool in there. That is 60 inches by 40 inches. And I think that's it. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Tatiana. I have been making my home in the United States for 22 years, but I've also done a really good job at holding on to my Bulgarian accent and speaking bad English, especially when I'm nervous. So here we are. Regardless of language and regardless of language skills, I think we all swim in ambiguity when we try to communicate with one another. And I'm intrigued by the ways that this metaphor applies to how the past communicates with the present. In my efforts to make a home here, I have had to find comfort in a new place and seek meaning in something that was completely unfamiliar to me. One way that I was able to move forward was to look back. Those flower arrangements came from a book of pressed flowers I made as a kid from my grandmother's garden. The flowers were growing in Bulgaria. They were brought to the United States. They were traced by hand. They were etched as empty impressions on copper plates to be printed on paper. They count from 1 to 16 for every year since the first print I made in 2005, and for every year I spend in my new home. I think that in my absurd effort to record, the flowers did not become more immortal or more preserved than where they began. But here I am. I like this Sisyphean effort that I put towards recording or obscuring. So I often wonder what happens when one alphabet is replaced with another. What is gained, what remains, or what is lost in translation? What happens in the space between learning something new and having to unlearn something old. I love the way that our questions and deepest experiences and most earnest desires rely on pauses and silences, negative spaces, how they gain through process or are remade in the making, and sometimes completely lost in translation. Thank you. I'm excited to work alongside you for the next 10 weeks.
Well, hello, everyone. All right, so my name is Megan Agolia. I'm a figurative sculptor and painter located outside of Richmond, Virginia, where I'm on traditional Powhatan land. And the pieces you see here are part of a current series of work, roughly half scale, all of women, done in clay. So within the work, I'm really seeking to blend contemporary feminist content with, I'm a little nervous, with traditional ceramic processes. So the works here, they're layered with underglazes, china paints, and then acrylic to finish up with the detailing. Let's see. And as you can kind of tell through the titles, they really represent these hyper-specific moments. Yeah, so for this title, for those of you that might not be familiar with the plow pose in yoga, it's a very bendy one, and a guaranteed way to snap your neck if you're not prepared. So obviously humor features a lot in my work, and to me that's a way to make things accessible and to really be able to ease into a dialogue, just like the material that I use is very accessible. I use terracotta. It's the same clay as bricks. There's really nothing special about it, aside from what you do with it. Now, as much as humor features into my work, sometimes they're not funny at all. So with the time that I'll be here at Anderson Ranch, I'll be working on continuing this series, and I'm working from, moving on from half scale to 1-to-1 scale. So we've got a little video. And I'm also making the jump from working from composite images to working with models. So this particular piece is my best friend. Wasn't too happy with how I had sculpted it. So I'm currently reworking it right now. Her father was devastated when I did this. And I was like, Carlos, I love you, but it's just, I can do better. I know I can. So the piece that I'm working on now in the studio is, like I said, the rework of this. So if anyone's curious about seeing the unsmashed version, you're welcome to stop by and come see what I'm up to. Thank you.
Hey everyone, I'm John Green. I am a printmaker primarily. I was trained in lithography at Tamarind Institute. My work is extremely precise and follows the tradition of lithographers in America. It comes from a place of having a weird childhood, separated from most people. My mother had a very traumatic childhood herself, found savior in therapy, became a therapist herself, and I was submitted to Freudian psychoanalysis 5 days a week for 18 years. So I saw most of my life from a small window that, like, I guess showed a few bird feeders, but I was in this one room with this one man every day, pretty much my whole childhood. This piece in particular was the beginning of a series of exploring spaces, boundaries from natural and architectural places. During the COVID pandemic, I was with my father in Philadelphia, and during the Black Lives Matter protest, all of the surrounding area was boarded up with plywood. So this was my interpretation of that time and how I felt, and I guess how the city was just getting covered. I have a really interesting relationship with texture and fabricating, I guess, or replicating textures from the real world in printmaking. My father's a patent attorney, so his entire field is about authenticity, who made it first, where does it come from, and I find that really interesting in relation to printmaking. And as the COVID pandemic went on, I was investigating how I perceive space, the spaces around myself, and really thinking about partitions and how we separate and divide spaces and divide ourselves from each other. So as I was investigating textures and replicating, I guess, areas around me, I was in a very minimalist, modern MFA program. I was taking colors from those places and also trying to see what I could do with that negative space and see how I could warp someone's attention and change the way they see their surroundings. And more recently, later in the pandemic, if we're still in it, I've been going to Spain quite a lot, and I've been influenced by the architects and artists there. This is based on Martin van der Rohe's Barcelona Pavilion. So my interpretations, my understandings of the textures that I find in those places, and seeing how I can break up space. The work I'll be making here is reminiscent of this, I guess, more present, more lithography, and maybe working a little bit smaller. But I want to backtrack for a second to how I was warping space as an installation artist. And I'll end here, but I'm very interested in changing people's perspectives of the spaces around them. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Viola Borden. I'm based in Philly right now, but I kind of feel like I'm from a little bit of everywhere. A lot of my work from the last few years has been dealing with different religious themes, so the pieces I'm going to show you today are all doing that. This one was a project called Bet, from the original hieroglyph for the letter B that kind of connotates like a room or a space. It was done with in collaboration with a friend of mine named Charlie Hart. And it was the culmination of a 2-year dive of research into salt as a mineral and salt as an agent of different forms. For a long time, I was exploring this mineral, and this work kind of came from these pillars that I was making that were completely submerged in salt. And eventually, salt became the structural form of this fiber. And held up quite large structures by itself. And so we went to explore where this salt was naturally occurring, and kind of with a thought of like, what would a space be that moved with kind of the environment around it, and what would a structure be that was influenced by the wind, by the salt, by the structures around it. And so we dug for naturally occurring salinated water in Jet, Oklahoma, and doused this thing 5-6 times a day until it stiffened and formed kind of a structure by itself. This is a different body of work, and one I'm in the middle of now. It's a series of 5 quilts that I'm doing on the church. The one on the right is based on Mother Teresa and her kind of role as a woman, as a missionary, and as a lot of different things within the Catholic Church, which has such a rigid structure, and yet she was a woman that managed to inspire her own pattern that's worn globally by people like her, and so kind of exploring her as like a really contradictory figure and someone that's really interesting. Juxtaposed to the one on the left was a reflection on the Republican Party in the United States and its connection with the religious right and the way that formed with Ronald Reagan in the 1980s. And his slogan was, "Let's make America great again," which was then used in with Donald Trump and his elections, calling on the same religious backing to bring power to his political ideas. And so I've been playing around with a lot of kind of figures who call on religious sources for different sources of power, and the way that that affects our bodies and the way that that gets placed on us as people. And then this is the last project that I'm going to show you. And it was, I became really interested in two different things in this project. One was the way that fibers can be formed by structures outside of themselves. And the other thing was this location, which was the bones of a church that had burned down in central Pennsylvania. And so I created a series of sandbags and created a pile of sandbags within this church structure to think about the ways that those things have interacted. So I'm a materialist at heart, so I kind of want to work with any material I can get my hands on. But fibers have been, like all three of these projects were in the last year and a half. So that's kind of where I've been stuck since the pandemic. But yeah, thanks.
Hello, I'm Bob Lamontagne. I'm from Fairbanks, Alaska, and I've lived there my whole life, and I've spent a lot of time in the backcountry in Alaska, but I've also haven't spent a full winter there in 25 years, so I travel a lot. And yeah, most of my stuff is, it's about a reflection on my life, so. This is glass blown on a pipe, so it's hollow, and these are formed with cane, and then the black parts are wood. And these are marinis. It's like glass mosaics that I make these little tiles, and they're all fused together and also blown hollow on a pipe. In the past, I've done a lot of woodworking, furniture building, and a lot of more craft, traditional glass blowing. And I started doing these maybe 5 or 6 years ago. So this is also Marini. So these are just, every tile is made individually and laid out on a plate and heated up and fused together and then rolled into a tube and blown and sculpted. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kamar, Kiana Winter. I knew I was going to forget everything I was going to say, so I wrote some stuff. I find my joy in the kitchen, standing before the moist heat of the stove, gazing into the rolling kaleidoscope of Sazon-tinged fat over stewed chicken feet. The kitchen is deeply intimate in the time it takes to prepare, the power there is in service, and the love it takes to nourish. As the smell of allspice and Scotch bonnet peppers singe the back of my nose, I'm tethered to Spanish Town, the generations-long home of the Winter family. Recipes, aunties, and faded photographs are their only vestiges. oil pastels in hand, warm, pigmented fat, stippling, pulling, folding unctuous whirls onto each papery surface. Each mark fashioned and crystallized through decades of Friday dinners and dented sulfur pots coming to boil. My practice is an archive of intimacies, the familial practices only learned through long looking, and the dishes I encounter through my journeys. Through these, I triangulate myself between the East Coast, Spanish Town, and in this current moment, Colorado. Thank you.
Hello. Do you mind if we skip like 20 seconds into this? Thanks. Yeah, just there is good. Yeah, that's fine. I see. Okay, there we go. So, a lot of my work unknowingly involves the viewer. For this particular piece, the gallery was completely dark when you walked in, and the viewer was instructed to put on a hard hat and put a plug into the wall. So through this modular body double composition with different appendages and orifices, sort of depicting the tension between delight and trepidation of pushing a body into ever-shifting and unstable terrains. Painting, printmaking, sculpture, graphic design, tattooing, and ceramics are remixed through my practice. Recently, I've found ceramics to be a fantastic convergence point for many of these interests. For example, in this piece, I use a technique called sgraffito that mirrors a similar feeling to tattooing a body, and sort of like in relationship to this sort of permanence as well. The blurring of these mediums is an alchemy that I find to be a right metaphor for rethinking how we might embrace life patterns, identities, or disidentifications. I reject the limitations imposed by specific fields and proper techniques. To me, the most exciting moments come when the categorization is unrecognizable or takes on a multitude of poetic interpretations. For my most recent large-scale project, which was also my thesis work for grad school, I wanted to create a piece that blurred the distinction between the gallery and the street. As many of you have kind of touched on today, the white cube has never excited me too much, and I wanted to make something that existed outside of the control of a confined space. This Gatorade dispenser, titled "What the Hell Happened to You, Sweetheart," is loosely based off this time that I accidentally rode my bike off the dock of a marina in Rockaway Beach in the middle of the night, and I was like, kept diving in and like trying to get the bike, and I couldn't get it. But then in the morning, this guy gave me this giant Looney Tunes magnet, and I was like able to like fish the bike out with the magnet. So anyways, there's like a lot of different like symbolic significance and kind of, I don't know, I sort of saw it as this sort of like self-portrait and culmination of like a lot of the things I'd been thinking about throughout grad school. That's kind of a close-up shot. There's sort of these recurring patterns and water flow and subjects that are kind of vibrating against each other and contradicting each other. And I definitely invited people to like drink the Gatorade, and some people went swimming in the fountain, which I loved. It was right on the busiest street in kind of like downtown Athens too, and so people could see it from their cars, and like that was really fun for me to see people's faces. This is just some of the stuff I've been working on post-grad school. I decided after moving all these huge, heavy sculptures, I wanted to kind of scale things down and kind of make these smaller worlds, kind of contained worlds within each other. So I think I'm gonna kind of be playing around with more of those things. So yeah, thanks.
Hello, I'm Justin. I'm here from Bloomington, Indiana. I'm originally from St. Louis. I received my MFA in 3D design, and so my work revolves around the design of furniture and objects. So here's a series of vases. I wanted to start with these because I think they capture a lot of what I try to get, of what I'm looking for in my investigation into design. I'm really interested in materials, in digital fabrication, and how those two cross over through craft. I'm also, I just love paper, and I'm really interested in the pliability of materials. And so these pieces have been thermoformed, press molded, and then they're bonded with silicone. In kind of where this work is going, I just continually try to bring in different materials into my studio practice. I regurgitate some in different ways. So here's a table that incorporates it's bent and brazed steel, and it's got Corian tiles. So I'm also really interested in how we're using domestic objects around us too. Just the really simplistic functions of more canonical objects that surround us in our daily lives, and how might we make those into really dynamic, fluid forms? What do those do to the environment that they're used in, and how could we even play with the sort of interaction that we have with those two? So in something like this, I'm just thinking about like how none of my friends use coasters on my really nice furniture. In here, I'm playing with the traditional technique of a timbre, and once again, trying to recreate what I could get a sheet of paper to do and just gently flowing over a metal frame. So in these, I'm bending steel frames, and then the timbre is sort of loosely laid on there and attached at just a few points, and borrowing heavily from modernism as well, as much of my work kind of references both modernism, having grown up in St. Louis. I also think a lot about the space age. I think that's just a really fascinating era of when, I don't know, in a sort of escapist idea of design and how that comes into play. So I'm borrowing some of the traditional forms used from that as well. This is some more recent work here. So both in the last work and in this one, I'm getting more into creating algorithms to help assist the type of crafting that I'm going through to, I guess, get more precision in the process, but also to be able to think more in broad series rather than in just an individual piece. And so in these designs here, the actual design in of itself is probably more the algorithm of the connection tabs that I use to pop all the paper together. And so then I can digitally sculpt a form and then apply this sort of tabbed algorithm onto it and laser cut these pieces. And they're obviously lamps. They're made from UPO paper, and they're on some 3D printed bases that are in recycled plastic filament. And then I've got more of those in the next one, so I've done a series of hanging lamps with those as well. So in my time here at Anderson Ranch, I'm hoping to think about some of the materials that I had been using and the forms that I'm using here, thinking about something that's a little bit derived from nature. It's organic, it's fluid, but I want to get into some materials that maybe aren't just paper and see where that takes me and the combination of those things in that process. So. Oh.
Thank you so much, everyone. What an amazing group. Your work is so varied, and it's going to be such a great 10 weeks of working alongside each other. And I can only imagine the conversations that we're going to have. So welcome to the ranch. Thank you for being here tonight and for sharing your work with us. And have a great evening.